Hello, my unraveled friends. Lean in, get a little closer, turn off those phones, turn down those lights. The story that I'm about to tell you, it's not some made up urban legend. It's not pulled from some creepy pasta. No, that's not what we talk about here on Tiff Unraveled. But for spooky season, we will talk about something that makes your skin crawl just a little bit. Every single detail that I'm about to share with you actually happened in Chicago in 1977. Can you imagine the spooky vibe? Well, I don't know. Things in 2025 are pretty spooky IRL. But for the vibe, Chicago, 1977. It's a story about murder. It's a story about justice. And it's also about something that science can't quite explain. It's about a voice that reached out from beyond the grave to name its own killer. You heard me. So if you want to, settle in around this little campfire, have a little FaceTime chat with me. Let's tell a spooky story and let's unravel. Picture this spooky scene. And no, I'm not talking about my hair today. I'm talking about February 21st, 1977 in Chicago in winter. It's bitter cold. The wind is whipping between the skyscrapers. The Sears Tower has just been completed a few years earlier, and it stands like this monument to human achievement. But in the shadows of progress, darker things were happening. Yes, they were. Around 9 p.m. that night, February 21st, 1977, in case you didn't hear me the first time, residents of an upscale apartment building on Pine Grove Avenue in Chicago's Edgewater neighborhood noticed something alarming. Smoke seeping out from under the door of apartment 15B. Someone called the fire department, and when firefighters forced their way inside, what they found wasn't a raging inferno. No, it was something much more disturbing. The fire was small. It was actually mostly contained to a mattress that was burning in the middle of the living room floor. But when they pulled that smoldering mattress aside, they discovered the naked body of a woman. She was lying face up, and protruding from the center of her chest was a butcher knife. The victim, our victim, was 48-year-old Teresita Basa, and the scene around Teresita told a story of complete violence and chaos. The apartment had been ransacked. Drawers were pulled out everywhere. Belongings were scattered all amongst the apartment. It was staged to look like a robbery that had gone horribly wrong. Her body had been deliberately positioned to suggest sexual assault, though medical examiners would later confirm that no such assault had occurred. This was not some frenzied random attack as it was staged to appear. No, my unraveled friends. Someone had taken the time at this crime scene to create a false narrative to point investigators in the wrong direction. And that kind of staging, as we know, usually means one thing. This was not some stranger killer from the street who broke in to Teresita's apartment and tried to rob her, and it went wrong, and he stabbed her in the chest with a butcher knife and then buried her in a mattress and then set the apartment ablaze. 'Cause that's crazy. This was likely someone that Teresita knew, right? Someone from her own world that wanted the police looking elsewhere. Now, once again, while I may realize that my mane today may be the visual representation of an actual nightmare, this beast shall not be tamed. Not today, friends. We shall tackle this another time. Tonight's nightmare is as follows. Now, to understand this case, as always, and even during my dramatic spooky retellings, I will always make space to remind you that we need to know who Teresita Basa was. Not only was her name incredibly beautiful, and it just like does this thing when you say it quickly, Teresita Basa. I wish she was, again, not just a name in a headline. She was a woman. She had a life story that made her murder all the more tragic. Teresita came from an aristocratic Filipino family. As a young woman, she was a gifted musician who dreamed of becoming a concert pianist. Pianists amaze me. My mother plays the piano, and like the dexterity, the beauty, the grace, it's literally like the ballerinas of instruments. Does that make sense? You know what I'm saying. Back to it. But World War II was happening at this time when she was a young girl, and the Japanese occupation of the Philippines shattered that dream for her. Her path eventually led very far from home to Europe first and then to America. By 1977, Teresita was working as a respiratory therapist at Chicago's Edgewater Hospital. Colleagues described her as quiet, dignified, and very dedicated. She lived alone in that apartment on Pine Grove Avenue. She was a cultured woman who was leading a quite solitary life in a very vast and impersonal city, Chicago. Okay. The police investigation hit wall after wall after wall. They interviewed friends. Of course they did. They talked to coworkers. They spoke with neighbors, anyone who might have known or had some sort of personal relationship with Teresita. But her circle was very small and very quiet. There were no jilted lovers. There were no angry rivals. There was no one with an obvious motive to commit this brutal crime. The only tangible clue that investigators had uncovered was a very cryptic entry in her journal. Dear Diary, get tickets for A.S. Without context, however, these initials unfortunately meant absolutely nothing to investigators. Just another dead end in a rapidly growing cold case. As winter thaws to spring and then spring turns to summer, the investigation had completely thawed. Teresita's file was sadly headed for that dusty shelf where unsolved cases so often go to die. For 5 long months, it seemed like Teresita's killer may actually get away with murder. But as it turns out, Teresita was not done talking. I didn't even need the spooky voice until now. Now I need the spooky voice. Our story now shifts to another Filipino immigrant working hard at Edgewater Hospital. Her name was Remibius, but they called her Remy Chua. Remy worked in the same department as Teresita, but just on a different shift. They knew each other, but only casually, only as colleagues who occasionally passed each other in the hallway. Hi, Teresita. How are you? Hi, Remy. How are you? It's a shit show. It's a shit show upstairs, but you got it, girl. You got it. You know what I mean? Remy lived with her husband. His name was Dr. Jose Chua, and they lived in a very quiet suburban type, lifestyle vibe, but it was about to become anything but normal. You see, in immigrant communities, especially back in the 70s, shared cultural roots often shared very powerful connections. And for those that were far from their own countries, their own homes, those bonds were a lifeline to each other. Connection. And the Chuas and Teresita shared not just a workplace, but a cultural heritage that included very strong beliefs in the spirit world. Very strong. In the summer of 1977, 5 months after the murder, something very strange began happening to our sweet Remy. It started with very vivid dreams and extremely disturbing visions. She would see Teresita's face, and behind Teresita's face, she would see a very shadowy figure of a man. Yes, a man. Soon, these waking nightmares, they escalated into something far more terrifying. Without warning, Remy would fall into what her husband would describe as, quote, epileptic type episodes, unquote, or, quote, comatose states, unquote. She would lie motionless, seemingly unconscious, unaware of the world around her. And then she would begin to speak. But the voice that came from her lips, it was not her own. No, it was a different voice. It was stronger. It was more commanding. It was filled with this otherworldly urgency. During one of those trances, the voice made a chilling declaration. It said, and I quote, "Am Teresita Basa." God, her name is so freaking pretty. Wish my name was that. It's not. Over a series of these episodes that Remy was having, the voice, speaking sometimes in English, sometimes in Tagalog, began to tell this story of Teresita's murder. Chilling precision. And what this voice would go on to reveal was astonishing. First, it named the killer without hesitation. This voice claiming to be Teresita named a man, Alan Showery. Alan Showery. An orderly who also worked at Edgewater Hospital. Second, it explained the motive behind the crime. Showery had come to Teresita's apartment ostensibly to fix her television set, which had been going awry, static, But that wasn't his real purpose. His real purpose was robbery. He needed money to pay his rent. Third, the voice would go on to describe jewelry that had been stolen from Teresita's apartment. These were pieces of jewelry that apparently the police didn't even know were missing. A pearl cocktail ring and a jade pendant, precious heirlooms that had belonged to Teresita's mother and had been purchased in France. Yes, not France. France. Most critically, the voice revealed where the evidence could be found. What? Yes. Showery, the voice claimed, had given the stolen jewelry to none other. Where do you guys think it went? Where did it go? Jewelry, a man, French jewelry. Where did he go with the jewelry? I'll tell you. He went to his girlfriend. He gave it to his girlfriend. And it was a Christmas gift to her. A belated Christmas gift, but a Christmas gift nonetheless. The voice, even provided the name of Teresita's relatives who could possibly identify these pieces. I know, it's crazy. It's crazy. Is it real? I mean, imagine being Remy's husband right now, Dr. Jose Chua. You're a physician. You are a man of science, a man of medicine. And suddenly your wife is falling into trances and speaking in another voice, allegedly, claiming to be channeling a murdered coworker? It must have been absolutely mind-boggling for him. Dr. Chua actually initially refused to believe it. He feared that if he went to the police with a story like this, it would make him and his wife look, quote, foolish or, quote, crazy. The trances continued. And the voice, it grew more insistent. And the details that it would provide grew more specific and more unwavering. The voice was sure. The voice was adamant. The sheer volume and the accuracy of the information that this voice was providing, it made coincidence virtually impossible. Dr. Chua faced an impossible question. How did his wife, Remy, how did she know these things? If it wasn't paranormal, then the only other explanations were equally as disturbing as that. Either his wife was somehow involved in the murder. How would she have all of these details? Or she overheard a confession. And both seemed, well, just as unlikely as the ghost story itself. Trapped between rational thought and undeniable experience, Dr. Chua finally made a choice that would change absolutely everything. In August of 1977, Chicago police detective Joe Stachula. Yeah. He received what I can imagine was probably like the strangest tip of his entire career. So the call came from the Evanston Police Department, right? And they were relaying this very bizarre story from a doctor, a local doctor, of his wife being possessed by the spirit of a murder victim. Should we? Okay, let's do that one more time. The call was from a man who was a local doctor about his wife being possessed by the spirit of a murder victim. Imagine being the police officer that took that call. What? Stachula. It's fun to say. All the names in this case are super fun to say. So, Stachula was a veteran homicide detective. Okay. He was a grounded, no nonsense police officer. He specialized in fingerprints. He specialized in ballistics. He did not specialize in spirits or spiritual possessions. That was not what he went to school for. Right. A ghost is not exactly a credible witness. Let's be real. Stachula and his partner, Lee Eplin, they began this very strange work, right? Strange work. This is new to them, right? But they began trying to corroborate this paranormal claim. And how did they do that? Well, they did confirm that a man named Alan Showery did indeed work at Edgewater Hospital. And on 11th day of August, sounds spookier when I say it that way. On the 11th day of August, 1977, they went to Showery's apartment to question him. And during the interview, detectives spotted his girlfriend. Pretty little thing. Her name was Yanka. Come look. Again, all the names in this story. Yanka Kamluk. That's probably not how you say it, but that's how I'm going to say it. And on her hand, on Yanka's little fingers, was, you guessed it, a pearl cocktail ring. Exactly how this voice had described. A search of Yanka's belongings actually uncovered the rest of the reportedly, by the voice, stolen jewelry. They were questioned, obviously, and when questioned, Yanka innocently confirmed that Showery had given those pieces to her. They were a gift. They were a gift from my man. And later, Teresita's family members, whose names, mind you, the voice had also provided those family members would positively identify those heirlooms as Teresita's. Stop. Are you serious? Are you kidding? Every single detail from the spectral witness was starting to prove to be fact. Facts. That's what my daughters would say. Facts. Facts? Actually, they probably wouldn't say that. Okay, so when confronted with this physical evidence, right? This jewelry that would have been impossible for anyone to know about. Helen Showery's composure, reportedly, because keep in mind this was 1977, and I cannot find a single thing about this case as far as like video or like an interview or anything like that. But come on, I tried. That's hard. He actually confessed to the entire crime. I'm losing my ghost story. I'm losing my ghost story voice. Okay, hold on. Showery admitted to going into Teresita's apartment with the intention of robbing her and then deciding to kill her when she resisted, and then setting her apartment alight to cover his tracks. The case was solved. The end. But then in a bizarre twist, Alan Showery actually later recanted his entire confession, and he told police that he was sorry. I don't want to break the mood. He later recanted what the fuck? He later recanted his confession, telling police that he was, quote, just kidding, unquote. JK, guys. Just kidding? A whole confession to a murder and a robbery. Who does that? Hold on. Detective Stachula now had his killer, but he had obtained him through a source that would never testify in a court of law. He had taken a profound professional risk here by following this lead, a fact underscored, of course, by the mockery that he endured by his colleagues, who began leaving him prank phone call messages from the dead. Nobody believed him. Nobody took him seriously. Come on. This can't be real, guy. This can't be real, they say. Well, Detective Stachula had apparently bridged the gap between procedure and paranormal. Yes. And now the case was headed for a place that had no room for ghosts. A court of law. So, in January of 1979, the trial of Alan Showery began, and it immediately became a media sensation. Newspapers dubbed it the, quote, voice from the grave trial, unquote. And people could not get enough of this supernatural angle. That's why we're here too, right? But the American legal system is not built for the supernatural, really. It's barely built for the criminal. I didn't say that. It's built on verifiable facts. It's built on empirical evidence. It's built on the testimony of living witnesses. This prosecution actually had a very strong circumstantial case. The stolen jewelry found in the defendant and his girlfriend's possession, and a detailed confession, even if recanted. But the entire investigation and the entire trial was tainted. It was tainted by its otherworldly origins, I would say. The defense team, which included the sister of then Illinois Governor James Thompson, well, she actually knew that this was going to be the state's greatest weakness, right? Their strategy was not to dispute the evidence itself. No. Why would they do that? But it was to attack the source of all of this evidence, right? They argued that Remy Chua is not some psychic medium, right? She's a disgruntled coworker with a grudge against Showery, claiming that he had actually complained about her quality of work at the hospital. They pointed out that her, quote, psychic symptoms, unquote, had conveniently begun just 2 hours after she had learned that she had lost her job at Edgewood. And then they started to paint her as a vengeful and unreliable accuser. In a shocking legal maneuver, the defense actually called Dr. and Mrs. Chua to the stand as their own witnesses. The goal was very clear here. The goal was to make their story of possession sound ridiculous in this totally sterile, rational environment of a courtroom. And thereby, they would discredit the entire foundation of the following police investigation. I don't know why I couldn't think of that word, and I don't know why my hands help, but they do. Don't ask questions. Just go with it. The jury, 12 humans, 8 men, 4 women. Well, they faced quite an impossible task, did they not? They were asked to apply this very rigid logic of laws to events that sounded like they defied logic themselves. And they couldn't ignore the concrete evidence, obviously, right? The ring, the pendant, the confession, but they also could not rationally accept in any way. I mean, imagine if it was you there. They could not possibly accept that the evidence was provided by a ghost. How do you cross-examine a spirit? How do you weigh the testimony of a voice from beyond the grave? Good question. The legal system, in its quest for certainty, had absolutely no framework for the unexplainable here. After days of deliberation on January 26th, 1979, jury declared that they were completely deadlocked here. The judge had absolutely no choice but to declare a mistrial. We hate to hear it. God, those words, we never want to hear those words. Alan Showery was one step closer to walking free. Justice, it seemed, to the friends and families and loved ones of Teresita Basa had been lost in this really strange twilight between two very different worlds. But then something unexpected happened. A month later, in February 1979, as prosecutors are preparing for this second trial, what happened? I'll tell you what happened. That's why I'm here, friends. That's why I'm here. Alan Showery did a thing. He did a thing that shocked absolutely everyone. What was the thing that Alan Showery did against the very strenuous advice of his own lawyers? Alan Showery changed his plea. He changed his plea to guilty. He was sentenced to 14 years for murder, robbery, and arson, a surprisingly lenient sentence at least by today's standards. I don't know what was going on in the 70s, but if you go into someone's house, rob them, murder them, stab them in the chest with a butcher knife, bury them under a mattress, and then set their home ablaze, 14 years seems a little... What do you think? And get this, after serving only a fraction of that time, Alan Showery was paroled. He was paroled from Stateville Correctional Center in July of 1983. Did you hear what I said? 1983. The man was sentenced in 1979. He served 4, I'm not good at math, years in prison. 4 years. You heard what I said? You heard me. Rewind if you didn't, or I can just say it again. 4 years. Alan Showery spent 4 years in a state correctional facility for all of those things that I just said that he did and pled guilty to. Yes, when Alan Showery came out of prison, he kind of vanished into obscurity. And honestly, from everything that I read, he has not been seen or heard from since the early 2000s. Yeah. His very sudden confession, however, remains the very final haunting mystery of this entire case. The rational explanation is one of pragmatism. His lawyers, maybe, likely told him that he would be incredibly lucky were he to go to trial again for a second time. Like, to get a hung jury the first time, second jury might not be so conflicted. They were like, sir, we took a chance on the first one. Maybe you should rethink doing this, round two. Maybe. Just throwing it out there. And a plea bargain for a 14-year sentence for these crimes? Maybe in comparison to what he would have gotten had he actually been found guilty by a jury of his peers, even in the 70s. Maybe it was a much safer bet than risking a conviction and, hence for life in prison. You know what I mean? Maybe he was like, I don't know. But another more chilling theory has always lingered around this entire case. Theory number 2 suggests that Showery's change of heart wasn't born of legal advice, but perhaps it was born of absolute terror. This theory points that maybe in the lonely silence of Showery's jail cell, maybe he received a visitor that didn't sign the book. Maybe he was visited by the spirit of Teresita Basa. And maybe when she came to visit him in that lonely jail cell at night, maybe she was delivering a message. Of course, skeptics offer other explanations for what happened with Remy. Maybe she was a master manipulator. Maybe she concocted this elaborate lie out of a grudge. Who knows? Maybe in a more complex psychological examination, she had subconsciously kind of just pieced together fragments of gossip and observation, from the hospital, right? Her mind began to assemble the puzzle of the murder with maybe even without her conscious awareness. And then the truth would sort of erupt from her psyche in the form of this possession. I don't know. Let's consider the possibilities, shall we? This will be fun. Remy, could she have been faking it? It's possible. But consider what that would mean for Remy. She would have needed to know, because she knew some of these things. She would have needed to know not just who the killer was, but she would have also have had to known specific details about this stolen jewelry. Right? This was real. The things that she said were taken off of Teresita were found on the convicted killer's girlfriend's fingers and neck. Explain. And keep in mind, police didn't even know that these pieces of jewelry were missing, when they were investigating the crime scene. She would have needed to know the names of Teresita's relatives who could identify and would later identify these pieces of jewelry. And she would have had to have been willing, because come on, she would have had to have been willing to just completely put her reputation, her marriage, and even potentially her career or even her freedom at risk by inserting herself into a murder investigation with a completely, not just fabricated, but kind of crazy story. This is kind of crazy, right? Second, could it have been some subconscious knowledge? This is a theory that maybe Remy had overheard conversations, that she had picked up on clues around her workplace, around the hospital, without consciously realizing it. And then under stress, her mind kind of organized this information and then presented it maybe in the only way that she could rationalize how she would know it, which would be coming from an external source. And this is actually kind of a fascinating psychological possibility, but it still does not really explain very easily how she knew about jewelry that was not public knowledge. Again, unless she heard about it overheard it, from conversations. In which case, like, why was she not just like, hey, HR, can we chat? I overheard this dude, this guy. Um, he's an orderly in this unit. Yeah, you know who I'm talking about. The guy. Yeah. So I heard him talking about taking some very specific jewelry off of the coworker that we have all recently lost. And so I thought you should know about it. She wasn't British, but that was fun. Third theory, could it? Oh, okay, hold on. Let me get back into the theory number 3. Could it have been Teresa's spirit all along? This is where we step beyond the boundaries of conventional science and investigation and the law. But it's worth noting that beliefs about the dead communicating with the living exist across virtually all human cultures throughout history. The specific cultural connection between Remy and Teresita, both Filipino immigrants sharing many cultural and spiritual beliefs about the world, adds another layer to consider here. What makes this case so compelling is that it actually does force us to confront the limits of what do we know, right? In our modern world, we like to think that we have explained absolutely everything, right? We know it all. We've seen it all. We've done it all. We've researched it all, and we can explain it all. We like to think, I like to think, that science has all the answers. All the answers. Even if we don't know them yet, science has them, period. But cases like Teresita remind us that maybe, just maybe, there are still mysteries that are beyond our understanding. Detective Joe Stachula, that hardened Chicago cop who followed this bizarre lead, actually later said, quote, "I've never believed in ghosts, and I still don't know if I do. But there's a lot of things in this world that can't be explained," unquote. In the end, the case of Teresita offers no easy answers. None. It's this kind of like chilling crossroads where straightforward murder investigation collides with the inexplicable. Let's be real. Whether it was a true voice from the grave demanding her justice, whether it was an incredible feat of the subconscious mind, or whether it was a clever and vengeful lie, the result was the same. A killer was named and a case was closed. As we sit here around this campfire on this FaceTime call, you and me, the boundaries between the known and the unknown, well, they seem a little thinner, don't they? We're left to wonder not only who actually killed Teresita Basa, but what or who truly solved her murder. And maybe that's the most unsettling thought of all, that sometimes justice can arrive through channels that we can't always explain, and maybe even through voices that we thought were silenced forever, that find ways to speak for one last time. So, what's up next? Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me, because telling this story was super fun. And I can't wait to see you again all month long. We're going to be telling spooky little stories by the fire. But we will also keep up with the cases that we've been following. But these are just kind of fun little October stories, just to kind of set the tone for spooky season, which I absolutely love. Yeah, this was really fun. I hope you guys come back and hang out with me later this week for another spooky tale. And if you guys know of any updates on any of the cases I've been following, please drop me a comment. And also leave me a comment below about what you think about today's case, today's little tale. What do you guys think? Can spirits speak to us from beyond the grave, Can a victim tell us who their murderer is, not with evidence, but with their voice? I don't know. Let me know. I will talk to you guys again super soon. And as always, please stay safe, keep asking questions, and keep unraveling. Love you.